everyone. Welcome to my public accountability meeting for North Yorkshire Police. I'm Commissioner Zoe Metcalfe and I'll be chairing the meeting today. So we'll turn to the agenda, and agenda item 1, and the attendance and apologies. I've got 4 apologies today, and that's from Elliot Foskett, John McFall, Lisa Winwood and Lindsay Butterfield. Agenda item 2, minutes of the previous meeting and actions. I don't believe there are any actions today, but the minutes from the previous meeting are recorded and published onto the OPFCC website, so you can access them there. So agenda item 3, questions from the public. So we do have a couple of questions from the Stray Ferret today. So hello, Stray Ferret, welcome. So let's have them up on the screen. Okay, so you can see the questions and all the information there on the screen. I'm just going to read out the actual 1 to 3 questions. So, and this is regarding 999 response time. Number 1, given that the target is for 90% of calls to be answered in under 10 seconds and North Yorkshire currently stands at under 40%, how is the force planning on improving this poor situation? Question 2, on that note, the averages provided by the Home Office and the force for July are different. Do you know why that might be? And 3, in addition, over the same 36-month period, only 12.95% of cases were marked as resolved. Would you be able to explain what this means and maybe shed some light on why the number is so low? So who would like to take those, please, and answer them?
So I can take those, Commissioner. So in terms of the first question, it's actually covered in the performance pack, and I am going to go into quite a lot of detail around the force control room performance. So if we move, so if we can cover that one in the performance pack, is that okay?
That's fine, thank you.
In terms of the second question then, which is around the differences between the Home Office and the force reporting for target times. So the Home Office quote figures from calls being answered from BT and transferred to the relevant force. But police forces do it differently. Police forces quote the answer times from when the call hits our telephone switch. So that's why you'll see differences in the reporting from the Home Office and the reporting from police forces. In terms of the third question then, so I'm going to reel through a list of the ways in which we resolve crimes here, but essentially resolved means that the case has been concluded and the investigation is complete. So that includes people who are charged with an alternative offence, community resolution, people who are summoned or given a postal requisition to court, people who are given youth cautions, youth conditional cautions, where another body or agency has the investigative primacy, where someone's given an adult caution, or when an offence is taken into consideration as well, but also when someone's given a penalty notice for disorder, given a cannabis warning, and then we have a youth restorative disposal. So those are all the means in which we can resolve crimes, and I appreciate that's a long list, but there's various different means in which we can get the conclusion for the crime and get the outcome for the victim of that crime as well.
Right, thank you very much for that. So we'll move to agenda item 4, and that's the presentation on stalking. And Fiona, you're going to do that for us.
Not a problem, Commissioner. As soon as the screen is clear, I'll share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen?
I can, but I don't think it's in presentation mode.
I'm going to do that next. Okay, I should be in presentation mode now. The first thing I'll say is just please forgive me if I'm not always looking directly into the camera, because I'm working on different screens. So my eyes will be flicking between one screen and the next. This is the title page, and as it actually clearly outlines, this is a presentation on stalking. So the first thing that I really wanted to cover is why stalking actually matters. And to do this, I was going to introduce some statistics. These statistics have come from the Crime Survey for England and Wales. And the reason why stalking is so important is that over 2.3 million people experience stalking in any calendar year. Victims can be stalked for years, with an average case lasting approximately 15 months. And many victims suffer up to 100 incidents before they actually talk to them. Violence is estimated to occur in 30% of stalking cases, and 5% of stalkers physically attack third parties as well. Stalking is considered a very high risk factor in domestic homicide, with the alarming figure that 75% of victims who are murdered have been stalked or harassed prior to them being murdered. So that's why it's particularly important that we target stalking, because we could be preventing homicide in the long run.
Fiona, I'm very sorry to interrupt you, but actually I don't think your presentation has moved on. For many is online, and I just wondered if you could have a look at it, please.
Okay, I can't understand why that's happening, because it's changed on my screen. Let me just press it again and see what happens. Have you
Fiona,
got white?
is it on presentation mode on your screen? Because we've
It
still
is,
got the
sir, yeah.
slides. We've still got
It
the
is.
slides on the side.
It's on presentation mode. Let me come out of it,
right.
come back into it again.
Thank
Oh,
you.
thank you. Thank you, V.
So it should now be on why stalking matters. Is that not the case?
Well, it is, but it's not in presentation mode.
Okay, I do apologise for this. I don't know why this is happening, because on my screen, let me come out of it.
We'll try one more time, otherwise we'll just have to get on with it. I think we can still see what's, what the presentation is, but as long as it goes into each page, that's fine.
Okay.
I'm happy to.
I am in presentation mode again, and it's not changing for you.
No.
Let me put the.
That's it. That's great. Thank you.
If you just give me the nod when you want.
Okay, no problem. Are you sharing your screen instead? Okay, shall I just say when I want the screen to be moved? Okay, I'll carry on because I can't hear the person on the other end.
Yeah, V, if you just give a shout, Tom will move it on. He's sharing the screen, and if you just give a shout when you want the next slide, he'll move it on.
No problem. I was just going to come to the final point on this particular slide about why stalking matters, is that 91% of people that report experiencing stalking then develop mental health problems, which clearly will exacerbate problems for them as victims. And just in terms of, to give you some context, when we talked about over 2.3 million people experiencing stalking, nationally, 4.5% of women and 2.5% of men reported experiencing stalking in 2019, and that equates to 1.5 million women and 820,000 men, which is an alarming figure. If we can just move on to the next slide then, please, which should give you a graph, which is the current North Yorkshire demand. Can you see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay, brilliant. Some really interesting figures here, and you'll see, I don't know if you can see the colour coding, but the top line is in relation to malicious communications. The middle line is in relation to, the orange line is harassment. The purple line, which is the one that's predominantly in the middle but then goes up, is malicious communications, and the one at the bottom is in relation to stalking. So in North Yorkshire Police, we anticipate that the volume of stalking, harassment and malicious communications will continue to increase over the longer term. in late 2019, there was a change in the way that stalking was recorded. So rather than an offence being recorded initially as harassment and then moving to stalking, should the circumstances be deemed appropriate, that was switched. So now when an offence comes in, it's recorded as stalking in the very first instance, and then there have to be reasons then why it shouldn't remain as stalking, and that was done to try and improve the accuracy of recording for stalking and offences. And if you look at the graph, you'll see as we go towards the end of 2019, there is a dip in relation to harassment offences and a rise in relation to stalking offences, which is undoubtedly a result of the change in recording. Offences that were committed and reported last year in 2021, they represented 86% of all recorded offences for this type, and 14% of those offences were then historical offences, non-recent offences of stalking. That basically means there's an additional suppressed demand that we may see unfolding as the years go on. It is predicted that the current and emerging technologies will enable perpetrators to easier access victims through cyber stalking. And for those that aren't clear what that terminology means, I'm talking about electronic means of stalking people and using computers and internet and digital technology. Cyber stalking methods include things like wireless connections and intrusions into people's homes or family environments, such as baby monitors or smart speakers, nanny cams and Bluetooth toys, and perpetrators are using these increasingly in order to stalk the victims. And perpetrators will invariably become more sophisticated in their use of technology to stalk, harass or bully victims. And it is expected that the volume and complexity of digital intelligence and data will increase, and that will prove challenging for those that are investigating those offences. Next slide, please.
Fiona, can I just ask you a quick question on that slide?
Absolutely.
So if we're saying that it's going to be continued to, or predicting, and there's going to be an increase, is North Yorkshire Police taking any extra measures to safeguard and support victims, including the early interventions and prevention activities?
Absolutely, Commissioner, and I'll come on to that in a later slide. If you forgive me, if I haven't answered that question by the end of my presentation, then please come back to me and I'll try my best to answer it. But I think it will be covered as we go on.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the next slide relates to the Stalking Action Plan for 2022. This is a result of the 2021 audit that was taken place. And the fact that we had an audit in 2021, I think, should be considered as a strength because it helped us to understand what was working and what wasn't working well. And as a result of that, we came up with an action plan. That audit acts as a benchmark against which we can measure future improvements or setbacks. So the impact of the audit then from 2021 is multiple. In terms of the knowledge that it gave us, it helps us to understand, as I've just said, what is working and what is not going so well. It presents us with a challenge as well because it leads us to ask how we can overcome the problems so that we can provide a better response to victims. And it also presents us with an opportunity because we can look at what we can do to ensure that stalking victims receive an excellent service from North Yorkshire Police. So there were a number of actions set as a result of the stalking audit in 2021 that aimed to increase knowledge and awareness of legislation and approved practice. We also had actions in relation to improving initial response and assessment in the force control room. In improving the quality of investigations, including supervision of those investigations, and finally ensuring that victims are safeguarded and signposted to appropriate support services. So a number of actions set which we've been working really hard to address in 2022, and we've also now conducted a further audit to look at how we've improved from that 2021 audit. So if we go on to the next slide, please. So forgive me because there's quite a lot of type on this slide, so I hope it's not too small to read. So in relation to the further audit that I've just mentioned, we conducted a further audit to assess the impact of the work that we've done as a result of the Stalking Action Plan, which came out of that initial audit. So in relation to the control room in the first instance, we have seen positive increases in almost every area. For example, in correct opening codes, supervisor gradings, force incident manager action logs and tags, and also an increase in niche and PNC checks. There's been the abandonment rate for stalking and harassment question set, which other callers go through when they're speaking to the person that's reporting, is now one of the lowest in the department, which is really, really positive. In terms of investigations, which is once the case goes out to the commands, the use of investigation plans has improved in a high percentage of stalking cases. Supervisor and officers have improved in identifying stalking offences, so they're beginning to understand the difference between stalking and harassment. Equally, supervisor and PIT 2 reviews. PIT 2 relates to a detective investigation. They have increased also. And whilst we still are seeing occasions where words of advice are given, there is an overall improvement in officers identifying that this is actually against force policy. And the stalking team, which we have in place in North Yorkshire, continue to monitor this and take the opportunity on every occasion to feed back to officers and supervisors if they identify that words of advice have been given inappropriately. Although there has been an increase in positive action being taken in stalking incidents, there are further opportunities to work with officers to secure evidence at the earliest opportunity. Dedicated office managers are now working in every CID office in the force, so that's Harrogate and York. They're in place to ensure that the most appropriate resource is allocated to investigate stalking offences. And finally, stalking clinics are provided by the stalking team for high risk or complex cases, or when contacted by officers for a one-to-one advice. Can we go to the next slide, please? So that was talking.
Sorry, can I just ask quickly? So obviously on the last slide we saw an overall increase in the number of incidents, and there's some really positive things which you're starting to identify here in terms of better identification by officers of those cases. In overall terms, though, would you say that the kind of that reason behind the increase is more due to increased reporting? Are we getting better at communicating to people that they need to report this better, and they are, or do you think it's mainly internal? And is there a balance of the two?
I think it's probably a combination of things. I think some of it is down to the change in recording. So it goes down as stalking in the first instance as opposed to harassment. So we're not wasting a lot of time trying to justify why it's stalking in the first place. And if it's recorded as stalking, then most officers will take it as stalking rather than having to use their initiative to recognise that it's stalking. So I think that's one thing. I think that there is an increase in reporting as well. But also, I think that the fact that office managers are in place to make sure that cases are allocated correctly, and that we've got a stalking team that are really scrutinising cases and identifying where stalking is being recorded. I think that they're all contributing, and I think as well we're having, we've had 14% of the cases that were reported last year didn't occur last year. So I think again that's just an increase in confidence of people recognising that actually it's not only officers that are recognising stalking, it's members of the public as well. So I think it's probably a combination of all those things.
Okay, that's really good to hear. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fiona, can I just ask a question about training officers? Can you just give me an example of how officers have been trained to identify the difference between stalking and harassment?
We've done quite a lot of training in relation to that, Commissioner, and a lot of it is in respect of how focused and fixated a perpetrator might be, so you will look at patterns of behaviour and look at history as well. So one of the things that we're really trying to do is encourage officers to look back at past records, so that they're not just looking at something in isolation, but looking at it together, because sometimes one incident, people might not recognise it as stalking on given just that one thing, but it's the combination of approaches and a lot of warning signs that we'll have encouraged officers to consider, such as turning up at people's home addresses or workplaces, and then the number of times that they might be contacting somebody or trying to contact them indirectly through third parties. And so it's a combination of different scenarios and using case studies to talk to officers so that they can recognise the signs.
Thank you.
Okay, can we move on to the next slide, please? Unless if we haven't done so already, we should be on challenges.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so we talked about some of the strengths, so this is to talk about some of the challenges. So these are areas that I think we still require improvement. And so I think it's fair to say that not all stalking and harassment reports are reviewed by a control room supervisor, which they should be. And again, although improved, which I've said already, niche and PNC checks are not routinely completed within the control room, and there could be lots of reasons behind that, because there's lots of other challenges within the control room at the moment. And I just want to reassure that although we need to improve that, if niche and PNC checks aren't conducted in the control room, that will be picked up later on down the line. It won't be missed completely. Officers have not always used body-worn footage to advantage when dealing with complainants of stalking and associated perpetrators. Evidence-based prosecutions are not always considered, and rationale, even when it is considered, is not always recorded where it should be, and we need to get much better at recording our rationale on our niche records. Supervisor reviews are not always being documented when a crime is transferred to another force area. And the reason why this is really important, that a supervisor's review would ensure that the officer in the case has gathered any early evidence for transfer, and that safeguarding has been put in place. So it just saves a lot of time in that other force then having to come back and ask us if we've done those things, because we've conducted a review and we've made it absolutely clear what we have done. Some incidents are being dealt with in isolation and finalised based on just one report, rather than taking into consideration the wider offending and previous reports that might have been coming in. And that's really important that we do that, because stalking perpetrators are very clever at just chipping away all the time and not necessarily doing, a great big gesture in one go. They'll just chip away constantly. So it's important that we make sure that we knit all that together. And the lack of detectives is impacting on investigations of stalking. I know that when asked to do this presentation, I was specifically asked if lack of detectives is impacting. And at the moment, although all high risk and stranger stalking cases are reviewed by the stalking team, medium and low risk investigations are not routinely reviewed by the specialist team, and many investigations are not sitting with a PIT 2 detective just because we've got that shortage. Now, I will go on to show you how we're trying to address some of those issues, but I think we have to be honest and say yes, we do have a challenge in terms of detectives, but we are working on looking for solutions for that. Could we move to the next slide, please?
Sorry for abusing my position of slide sharing.
Not a problem. It's really difficult because I can't see anybody's faces now, because I seem to have everything. The presentation's on all of my screens, so I can't see anybody. So I can't see whether you're getting ready to speak. So please.
No, that's fine. Just in relation to body worn, because obviously using body worn is one thing, but I'm well aware that in some other aspects of policing work, it's not always marked properly, it's not always saved properly as evidential. And I just wondered whether you were having a similar issue on the stalking front as well. Is it just that they're not using it, they're not turning it on in the right place?
Yeah, that and I think
that is also that it's not being saved.
It probably will be both, to be honest. If that's an issue for us across the board, then I can't see any reason why the body worn footage for stalking will be any different. But I'm going to come on to talk about that again in a moment, just in relation to what we're trying to do to resolve that. But if there are technical issues in terms of it not recording, then that's more than likely to be the same issue with stalking.
It wasn't a technical issue. It was simply that officers weren't marking it as evidential, so it was getting deleted after 30 days rather than being saved.
I'm confident that if there is body worn footage for a stalking incident, that would be picked up, and we would make sure that had been recorded, and because that's really important, particularly if we're talking about gathering early evidence and looking at evidence-based prosecution. So that would really be, we would look at that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we can move to the next slide, please, which is about opportunities to improve. Okay, so what can we do to improve then? So these are some of the solutions that we're looking at to try and narrow that gap between the strengths that we've identified and the challenges. So an automatic tag will be created and added for any incidents open to stalking and harassment, which will prompt a control room supervisor to review the grading of an incident. So that will address that issue of FCR supervisors not always grading an incident. Training will continue to be delivered to control room staff regarding the importance of conducting PNC and niche checks on every occurrence of opened as stalking and harassment, because the earlier we have that information, the better. The use of body-worn video when attending an incident. We have updated the force policy, which makes the use of body-worn video as mandatory, and that will obviously increase opportunities to strengthen investigations. But I completely take on board what's just been said about the other issues in relation to body-worn video, but I'm confident that the increased supervisor reviews and the attention that is being paid to stalking by the stalking team would pick that up as well. Ongoing training with officers and supervisors will ensure that evidence-based prosecutions are considered prior to finalisation of a report. Small changes to the niche template will prompt officers to document that they have considered evidence-based prosecutions and outline their rationale for not proceeding, which in turn would obviously be looked at by supervisors as well, and challenge some of that rationale. So if it's not sound, that will be picked up and we would look at it again. Ongoing supervisor and officer training and feedback from the stalking team to highlight this as being a requirement that we must be considering evidence-based prosecutions and recording our rationale. And again, ongoing supervisor and officer training and feedback from the stalking team will highlight the need to identify the wider offending and why this is particularly important in relation to stalking and harassment offences, because of the types of MO, the methods that perpetrators use to offend is particularly prevalent here. It's kind of a combination of small acts that combine to constitute stalking and indeed harassment, and so that's why it's so important. Can we move to the next slide, please?
All right, a couple of questions from me again, if I may. First one, is there any link between the first and the last bullet here? So is what you're trying to do with the system going to automatically flag cases more effectively rather than relying on human error, I guess is my question. Is that going to help?
Certainly in relation to the niche template to prompt officers to document that they have considered EBP, evidence-based prosecution, will certainly help. But in relation to the latter point about officers and supervisors really being reminded that they need to look at that wider offending and look at patterns, then that niche prompt won't necessarily prompt that. It won't be automatic, which is why it's so important that we have the stalking team there and supervisors as well that are looking at the workloads of their officers and making sure that they're quality assuring the investigations that they're undertaking.
Sorry, but it was more in relation to the automatic tag that's going to be created.
Oh,
will that start to flag cases where there are multiple stalking and harassment reports, or will it just be a tag for things that will still take a manual
in terms
trawl?
of the control room tag, that's in particular in relation to the incident as it comes in. So it's not establishing a pattern. Now, whether we could use that to look back and see, I don't know. I'd have to go and ask people that are more technically minded than me. But the way that I've read that is that it will highlight the isolated incident that is coming in on that day, and prompting the control room to make sure that they review that incident.
Because I guess, I mean, if that is being put on, something that would flag those up would obviously be a benefit and would save people having to do manual. That's interesting. Thank you. And the other one, in relation to the evidence-based policing, you said something there about. Could you just flesh out that audit trail? How are you checking that training's having the impact that you want it, and that their rationales are actually legitimate? Can you just flesh out how you're going to be assuring yourselves of that, please?
Yeah. So what we will do is we will continue to conduct regular audits. So we did one in 2021, we've done one in 2022, and we'll do one again in 2023. But in the meantime, our stalking team are conducting regular dip samples of stalking cases and looking at all high risk and stranger cases in any event. So we should be able to pick up that officers are considering EBP as a matter of course.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, can I ask a question, please? Oh, sorry, Caroline, you go. Caroline, do you want to ask yours? Thank you.
No, thanks, Zoe. Fia, I was just going to ask about work with other forces, appreciating what you said about supervisor reviews and appreciating from other areas for people coming in about the safeguarding measures. What could be expected really about the service that's offered there?
It's a really good point that you raise, Caroline, in relation to other forces, because that's something that we do encourage the stalking team to do, is to go out and look at good practice in other areas. And we've identified Sussex as being a particularly strong force in relation to their stalking service that they give to their victims, and the work that they also do to address perpetrator behaviour. And so we're actually sending two of our team down to go and spend some time with Sussex to look at what they do, so that we can learn that practice and bring it back and try and replicate it in North Yorkshire. So we will be doing that. I think they're actually going down next month. But we also talk more locally to our regional forces, try and identify best practice there, and take our concerns and ways that we could try and improve with our neighbours as well. So that the stalking team are really good at linking in with other forces to try and identify best practice that way.
Thank you.
Fiona, you've titled this, what can we do to improve? So my question is, when are you going to have done all these improvements? I mean, I know that training is continuing, but is there a timeline to this when these improvements will be in place?
Commissioner, some of that stuff is already happening. The automatic tag is being created now. I'm not sure exactly when it will go live because I've not had an update on that, but I anticipate that will very, very soon. In relation to the training, that is an ongoing issue, and I envisage that will continue, and there won't be a deadline to that, because one of the things that we've identified, not only in relation to stalking and harassment, but in other areas as well, is that we're very good at going out and delivering training and then going away and never revisiting it. But studies show that if you continually go back and revisit the training that you've delivered and make sure that you're capturing new officers that are coming in, but also making sure that you're capturing officers that maybe have more than 3-4 year service, who might not have had the luxury of having that training when they first joined, because we're very good at capturing you know, the new recruits that are coming in, and also delivering training to newly promoted sergeants. And where we really need to try and identify now is how we can go in and train other officers. And I'm sure you'll be aware, as part of the child protection inspection, as a result of the recommendations made there, we've now identified the need for a shift training day, and that will start to be rolled out in September, so we can use those opportunities to revisit stalking and deliver training through that training day. And I anticipate that that will be a rolling programme, and we will potentially use things like case studies, or, you know, use ways where they've gone well and ways where they've not gone so well, so that we can drive that training. And we've also got new legislation coming in, and we can use those opportunities to deliver there. And in relation to the body worn footage, that will be continual auditing to make sure that that is taking place. But given that it will now be mandatory for officers to record when they go to any incident of a public encounter, then it'll just be making sure that they're actually recording it as evidence, and we'll conduct that again through audit. So a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about at the moment doesn't have a cut-off date.
Okay, thank you.
The next slide then is in relation to future aspirations. So this is about what are our aims and what we anticipate the results will be. So on the back of what we've already talked about, these are some of the additional things that we'd like to do. So we're exploring area-based stalking champions, and they've been identified to further improve our response to stalking, and a discussion for implementation will follow. And this will lead to greater awareness overall. And the reason we've not driven that so far is that obviously we've been very focused on the child protection inspection, but also looking to embed domestic abuse champions. So stalking champions will come next. Discussions are already taking place with the prosecution team, court staff, to devise a procedure for direct court result updates to victims of the most high-risk stalking cases. And the reason we want to do that is we want to deliver a better service to victims. So we want to make sure that that they're the first to hear of the results from court. Links have been made between the stalking team and the CPS stalking lead for the most high-risk stalking cases, and this should lead to improved investigations and more positive outcomes. Procedures and policies are being created for the implementation of stalking protection orders. This will lead to an efficient process to support implementation and increase our opportunities to apply successfully for stalking protection orders. And finally, student officer control room and supervisor stalking and harassment training continues, as I've already said. There is scope to roll this out further to public support, police support community officers, to front office staff, and to special constabulary should resources allow. Further training will result in increased understanding and leading to improved standards and service to victims. So that's what we're trying to get to in the end, is making sure that we improve service to victims. So those are some of the things that we aspire to do in the future. Any questions, or can I go on to the next slide? No? Okay, can we move to the next slide, please?
Done.
Stalking protection orders. So I just mentioned this slide already in previous slides. So you may well ask, what is a stalking protection order? This is a civil order, the breach of which is a separate criminal offence which is punishable by up to 5 years custody. A stalking protection order provides not only the potential to have restrictive prohibitions, which could include things like contact prohibitions, address exclusions and curfews, but also positive requirements to help address potential underlying issues and prevent reoffending. So a positive requirement might include getting the perpetrator to engage in certain programs and attending assessments with specialists. Upon the application, there is an emphasis to make positive requirements, thus avoiding potential duplication with restraining orders, non-molestation orders, etc., which solely deal with restrictive prohibitions. And this is really important, particularly for North Yorkshire, because there is a real emphasis on making positive requirements. And so if you're in a position to do that and make a positive requirement that a perpetrator may need to attend a course that will address their behaviour, you're far more likely to be successful at court at getting a stalking protection order. Now, the issue that we have at the moment in North Yorkshire is that we don't have any facilities to offer any kind of treatment programs for perpetrators, and that's something that we're really keen to look at in the future. There are two types of SPO, an interim, which is decided on the balance of probabilities and can last up to 2 years, and then a full order, which is decided on the criminal standard of beyond all reasonable doubt, and which can be made until a further order. In North Yorkshire, we have had one stalking protection order successfully applied within North Yorkshire, and we have had 7 further potential SPOs referred for formal advice to North Yorkshire Police Legal Services. So it sounds disappointing that we've just had the one, but I think it's really important that we look at that in context against the fact that we're not able to offer any positive requirement facilities, and that we have sought to apply for 7 further SPOs, but not managed to get them over the line. The financial impact is not a barrier to application. That was a question that I was specifically asked to address. The North Yorkshire Police legal team is part of Evolve, which is a collaboration with Durham and Cleveland. Funding for SPOs is managed in the same way as any other court order application and is business as usual. In the event that the budget was exhausted, there is resilience provided through the collaboration. So financial impact would never influence whether North Yorkshire Police applied for a SPO or not. Any questions in relation to that, or are you happy for me to move on to the next slide?
Fiona, I was just going to ask about the 7 that just didn't get over the line cases. And I know you can't talk about individual cases, but was there a theme? Did we not manage to get enough evidence? Could you just expand a little bit on that?
Can I, in relation to that, what was the difference to the one that did get across the line? I guess it's another way of putting it.
Very, very valid questions, and I'll be completely honest, I don't have that information in front of me now, and I certainly would not want to guess, but I could certainly go back and ask that question and feed that back in later.
That'd be great. Thanks, Fiona.
Not a problem. I don't want to make it up, and I have got that information, so I'm sorry I've not got that with me.
Fiona, could I ask, sorry, in addition to that, just in terms of working with partners across this as well, are there, in terms of that positive requirement, are there any ways of working with partners where that might be possible? I don't know whether the CPS or probation or any of our criminal justice partners have those kinds of programs that could be looked at as well. Is there any kind of benefit in looking at the partnership landscape on that front?
I think that's a really valid question, and I think there's potential for that, and that's one of the main reasons why going down to Sussex, because they have a really robust stalking team, far bigger than what we have in North Yorkshire. But one of the things that we will be looking at there is just what work are they doing with partners, that we could take that back and then discuss that with our partners to see how we can replicate their success down in Sussex.
Can I just come in as well, Fee? I know we've been working in partnership with our provider in Area Foundation to look at developments that we might be able to make with our existing provision for domestic abuse perpetrators, and how appropriate it would be to make amendments to the programme that we already have in place, in order to be able to work with stalking perpetrators. So there's work that we've been undertaking in partnership already to look at identifying appropriate positive interventions, but there's obviously, as Fee said, more to do in that space, and we want to make sure we're working in partnership to develop something that's bespoke to North Yorkshire and right and appropriate for the perpetrators that we've got here. So, and some of that will come in. I'll talk maybe a little later when I know Fee's talked about the support services around some of the funding that we've accessed through the Home Office. Sorry, not through the Home Office, but through the Safer Streets Fund, which might allow us to do some further work in this area as well.
Absolutely, and really excited to look at how we can look to try and secure some funding to try and get some of those programmes in North Yorkshire, which I think would really help not only the victims, but also really look at prevention and early intervention. Because while, you know, if we get a SPO on a stalking perpetrator, that's focused on that one victim. But if we manage to get a positive requirement attached to that SPO, then that change that perpetrator's behaviour and mean that they don't go on then to target somebody else. So we're preventing further offending, which I think is really important.
Thanks, Fee. It would be great if we could get that feedback around the difference between that 1 and the 7, just to understand how you got that 1 across the line and what the positive difference was there. I guess that would be really good to hear about how you assuring that. Thank you.
Not a problem, and I will get onto that and get that information back as quickly as I can.
Thank you. I'll move the slide on.
Thank you. Okay, so I just wanted to take a little bit of time. I'm really conscious that I'm running out of time, just to talk about the dedicated stalking team we have in North Yorkshire Police. I have to stress it's a very small team of 3. We have 1 detective and 2 stalking support officers at the moment. This was established in 2021, and there is definitely scope for future growth. I'm sure the deputy will be really keen to hear me say that I will be asking for further staff for the stalking team in the next people plan. The training inputs that are delivered to a number of officers and staff, most particularly within the control room and those in frontline policing roles, as I've already mentioned. They provide that training. This has led to a significant improvement on the force's response to stalking, as evidenced in the 2022 audit as compared to the 21 audit. Stalking clinics are being run for high-risk complex cases, which has been very well received by those who have attended. And I think that has a knock-on effect as well, because if an officer has what they think is quite a complex job and they're not really sure where to go with it, and they go and have a sit-down with the stalking detective and get some really bespoke, high-quality advice, that news travels. And so that encourages other people then to contact the stalking team and ask for support in relation to their own investigations. And it's a developing initiative really, and the DC is extremely busy providing that support to officers now. The dedicated PIP 2 detective is able, as I've just said, to support investigations with specialist knowledge on an ongoing basis. So it's not just one-off advice, they're there available. So if the officer hits a barrier and not sure what to do next, they can always go back to the detective and ask again. A stalking inbox has been created because it's not always easy to get in touch with people. So we have a stalking inbox that the team are able to access on a daily basis, and officers can ask for advice and support with live investigations, and we will get back to them as soon as we can. The 2 stalking support officers provide dedicated support to stalking victims from the outset and provide regular updates throughout. And again, I think that is really, really important because victims often don't feel able to open up and disclose everything right at the outset. And if you remember what I said right at the beginning about how it could be up to 100 occasions before they'll actually have the courage to ring the police. So it takes a long time for a lot of that information to come out. So it's really, really important, which is what you were asking about at the beginning, Commissioner, in relation to weekly reviews of our response, both in the control room and the local policing response. And some of the checks that they're doing include, they will look at all stalking related reports that are called into the control room. Occurrences are reviewed by members of the stalking team to ensure that the reports are being dealt with appropriately. Additional remedial action is carried out by the team where necessary. And the main reasons for additional remedial action being predominantly due to public protection notices not being issued by the officer. On all occasions, a member of the stalking team won't just address the problem, but they will also provide feedback to the officer so that they know and learn from where they've gone wrong in the past, and hopefully that will ensure that they don't make that same mistake again. So I think that's really important that we give that feedback so that people learn, and that, again, depending on how that is done, and we try to do that in a positive and constructive way, it's received as such, and when people have a good experience, they tend to tell their colleagues about it, which is clearly the way to go. So that's some of the work that the dedicated stalking team do. Any further questions on that, or can I move on to my next slide?
Sorry, I do have one. It's a bit of a devil's advocate question, I guess. We haven't had an increase in SPOs. Are we seeing an increase in convictions, successful prosecution and conviction?
We've got at the minute, I can't remember exactly, I'm sure I have this typed out somewhere, but I think we've got up to 7 people at the moment on remand. You know, they've not gone to trial yet, but we've got 7 people on remand, which is really positive.
Okay, that's positive. In relation to the number of cases we've got, here's the you're wanting to expand this team. Do you feel that you have enough evidence of its benefit? Because obviously the training that you're giving to all of your officers is probably the critical piece in terms of building the better case quality and all of that we know is always an issue. Is that really down to the stalking team, or is that everybody's getting better? Sorry, it's
That's a really difficult question to answer, and I think it probably is a little bit of both, and I think maybe one is feeding the other. The fact that there is a dedicated stalking team, I think, is crucially important. They've got the time and the dedication to be able to sit down and give that bespoke support to officers. The stalking support officers who are actually dealing with the victims, I think they're giving an absolutely critical service. And we just, you know, officers that are carrying heavy workloads just don't have the ability to give that same dedicated support to victims as the stalking support officers can do. And again, in terms of the quality of investigations, you know, detective sergeants and response sergeants are looking at trying to provide investigation support and reviews on numerous crimes that are being held by their officers. And the fact that the stalking team can look dedicated at stalking crimes, I think, is really important, and will really support our drive to secure more convictions. But I think it's also really important to recognise that that's not the only outcome in terms of stalking victims, due to the complexity of some of the cases that we might be talking about, and given that some of the offences are really, you know, aren't being reported at the time and are being reported, you know, further down the line, and that makes them more difficult to investigate to some degree. And actually, if we give that victim support and we safeguard that victim and their confidence in the police increases, I think that's a positive outcome as well. If we never manage to get that to court, that's unfortunate, but that's not the only outcome we should be looking at. And the increase in the training that we're delivering to officers means that they are much more able to identify stalking. And I think so I think that the numbers will increase, and that that makes it more likely, I think, in the future that we will secure more convictions.
Okay.
But it may take a little bit of time, but I'm really confident that will happen.
I completely agree. I guess it would just be, I don't know whether it's possible to see more. Maybe there's case studies or something that we can see where and I don't doubt what you're saying about the tangible benefits that the team are making, and I know that that's often the case, but resources are finite at the end of the day, and there's lots of places. I know it's a terrible decision where you're going to put those resources, isn't it, always? So understanding the benefit that this team is making rather than putting them elsewhere is always an interesting one. But that sounds
absolutely, and I think I think really that shocking statistic that 75% of women that go on to be murdered have been stalked or harassed prior to their murder, I think is really, really powerful. And so I think we need to think beyond preventing stalking, is that we're also looking at preventing homicide. So I don't think we can lose sight of that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. No problem. The last slide, or my penultimate slide, should I say, is just in relation to some of the safeguarding arrangements. And again, Commissioner, this kind of relates back to that question you had at the outset. So it partly depends on the nature of the stalking as to what safeguarding arrangements will be put in place and where we can signpost people. If it's domestic related, referrals will go to IDAS. If not, referrals can be made to the Susie Lamplugh Trust and to Paladin. And digital safety planning is something that the team are really keen to deliver, and this refers back to that anticipated increase in cyber-enabled stalking that I referred to earlier, such as mobile geolocation apps, physical devices that I've mentioned, such as micro cameras, trackers, etc. So we spend a lot of time talking to victims about the potential for things like that, and to make sure that they're aware of those dangers, and to try and make themselves as safe online as they possibly can. We also fit electronic alarms where appropriate, particularly given the rural nature of much of the force. That can be really important if victims feel like they're living in a very isolated area. Fully digitalised search using a DigiDog, which is something that technical support unit can now provide. I've never seen our DigiDog, I can't say that, in practice, but I've seen videos. I think the dog is called Sky, but amazing what that dog can do, and very, very clever. If people don't quite know what it is, it's a real life dog. It's not like the metal canine that you used to see on Doctor Who. It's a real dog that has an amazing ability to sniff out digital devices that could be very, very well hidden. So a real asset for North Yorkshire Police. We also provide bespoke local support that I've mentioned. Stalking support officers are able to build up those longer term relationships with victims to ensure that victims can talk when they're ready to talk, which often takes time and does not always happen when officers first attend. And I think that, going back to the thing that we talked about, body worn video, and the evidence on that body worn video, and being able to capture that early evidence. Often the victims might not say very much, but what a camera can capture is their demeanour. And I think that can be really powerful, and is all building to that evidence base. But the support to the victims, I think, is crucial. And finally, we do have a stalking pilot that continues in Scarborough, and the stalking pilot is unique to Scarborough. It's not a pilot that could be replicated across the rest of the force. It relies very heavily on an individual, a forensic psychologist. But I'm really confident, and the stalking team, having spoken to the team, that they are well equipped to respond force-wide to ensure that investigation plans are fit for purpose and the support for victims is bespoke. So it's really interesting that we have that pilot in Scarborough, and it's done some really good work. But I think that we can make a lot of progress without having to roll that pilot out to the rest of the force.
Fiona, can I ask you a question, please, on the Scarborough pilot? And that is, how do you evaluate it to see if it's successful?
That's a really good question, Commissioner, and it's not something I've had the opportunity as yet, whilst I've been in post, to really look at. It's retrospective. So what the Stalking pilot does in Scarborough is to look at case studies and see if we can replicate the learning from those case studies. So I think there's been very limited work so far to evaluate the work of that pilot, but I have to be honest, I'm potentially not the best person to answer that question. I'd need to go back and speak to the officers in Scarborough that have conducted that pilot, just to unpick just how valuable that's been for the Scarborough team. And I'd be happy to do that if that will be helpful.
Yes, please, if you could do, it'd be very interesting to know. Thank you. And also what their learning has been from that, and how we could roll it across the patch, North Yorkshire and York.
Not a problem at all.
Thank you.
I think that last point is really the crux of it, because I mean, we've heard some very positive feedback from it, and I guess our question has always been why couldn't it be rolled out? Because there seems to be some hesitance to rolling it out more widely previously, and we've never really understood why that was. So it would be interesting to understand further as to the kind of position on that, and what the perspective on it is, please.
Not a problem at all. I mean, having spoken to the Stalking team, I wonder if, because I think that the individual involved in the Stalking pilot is, I'm not sure how we will be able to replicate that, but I don't want to surmise. So I'll go back and try and unpick a little bit more and come back to you on a future date.
Thank you.
And finally,
Zoe, can I just pick up as well? I'm just fine to be on that slide while we talk about this because it's related. Obviously we've got arrangements in place for referrals to go into our cope and recovery services to support our stalking victims, and as you've said, referrals into IDAS if they are domestic related, but we've also got the arrangements in place with our independent victim advisor service who are accessed through our supporting victims team, and we have automatic data transfers that go into the supporting victims team, so direct contact can be made with victims and the service offered to them. So there's also the independent victim advisor service that provides cope and recovery support to non-domestic stalking victims, and I know the team are working really closely with the stalking team within NYP to make sure that the right referrals go into that team, so that's positive.
Thank you. I don't know whether that's something that we've maybe just missed off inadvertently there, Jenny. But no, thank you for mentioning that. Okay, finally, the last slide is just in relation to some of the support services that we do use and signpost our victims to. I won't start to read all that out. You can all see that, but yes, it's a growing market. I think that there's more and more services available for stalking victims, which is really positive.
I think as well, if I can also come in there, it relates to the Safer Streets funding that we spoke briefly about earlier. So one of the things that we are looking to do in partnership with Susie Lamplow is to look at training our cope and recovery support services in advocacy specifically, because obviously each of the organisations that deliver cope and recovery services for victims of crime are go through bespoke training in order to be able to support the individual victims that they are working with. So if it's domestic abuse related training, and if it's sexual violence and sexual violence related training, and we're looking at working more closely with Susie Lamplow to make sure that there is a specific stalking element to the services that we commission. So obviously our IVAs our ISVAs and our IDVAs already have stalking training, but this just would add value to that and enhance the level of training. And it's linked into what Fee's talked about earlier in terms of kind of reiterating that training and running it kind of continuously on an ongoing basis. So that's really positive. The other aspect to the work with Safer Streets is also the production of some short animations that again could add value to the training elements in relation to stalking. So working in partnership to make sure it adds value to what's already been delivered to NYP and to partners and to our cope and recovery services, so that there's a real level of understanding that kind of translates from service to service as well. So that's really positive. And then the other aspect of that is the commitment that Zoe made through the Susie Lamplugh Trust to increase reports of stalking in the next financial year. And the work that, again, we're hoping to do with Susie Lamplugh and Rural Media, another organisation that we're working with, to create some bespoke film and resource pack work for the community so that we can help members of the public to understand what street harassment looks like and what stalking looks like when they see it, so that they can have the confidence to be able to come forward to NYP and report those as well. So it's just connected to a number of the areas that we've been able to secure funding on for through the Safer Streets work.
Thank you, Jenny. And the last question is really just to, the last slide was just to prompt questions, but that's already happening. So, and I haven't been able to look in the chat box at all, I'm afraid. So I don't know if there's other stuff in the chat, but yeah, that concludes my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention. And I apologise profusely, Mr. Walker, that I've eaten into your time.
Fiona, thank you very much. That was very interesting. There aren't any additional questions in the chat box, so don't worry about that. But you've answered an awful lot of questions today, so thank you. If you can get that additional information to us, I would really appreciate that.
Not a problem.
Thanks, Fiona. Okay, we're going to go on to agenda item 5, and that's North Yorkshire Police performance update. And Michael, welcome to the meeting. And you're taking this forward, you're presenting on this, thank you.
I am, yes. So I will just share the screen and then go as quickly as I can. Can we see that in presentation mode?
No, unfortunately not.
Try again.
It is now, Mike.
Yes.
Excellent. Right. Okay. So this is the public accountability meeting police performance pack. I'll run through it. A few of the slides I'll spend a little bit less time on. What I want to do is focus on answering the stray ferrets questions as well around the FCR side of things, and those are the first 2 slides that I'll focus on first of all. So as you can see from this slide, this is in relation to 999 call handling. You can see the graph and how it's fluctuated over certainly the last couple of years. But at the bottom, you can see that the average speed of answer is 20 seconds. The target is obviously 10 seconds. So that number is an unacceptable number, which I certainly know is unacceptable, which is why, as I'll discuss in a minute, we've put in several measures and will continue to put in several measures to improve that and get it to the point where we're answering it as quickly as possible and reducing the risk to those people on the other end of the phone line. So and I'll come back to the emergency call one, but the non-emergency calls as well, it's important to point out here that the average speed of answer at the bottom for July has been almost 6 minutes, our 3-monthly average being around the 4-minute mark as well. What I will say is this, both the 999s and non-emergency call handling times has been improving really well certainly over the last few weeks, and that's because of the measures that we've put in place, which I'll go into more detail on now. So I'll leave it on the slide there around the emergency calls, but we know certainly that demand has increased steadily since 2018, not just for North Yorkshire, that's nationally. And certainly when all the COVID lockdowns were lifted, we saw some real increases in demand into police control rooms around the country, and North Yorkshire weren't exempt from that. We know at the minute it's around 20 seconds is the average speed of answer, and as I've said already, that absolutely needs improvement. So some of the measures that we've actually put in place to reassure the public, because what I want to do is offer that reassurance that we are taking this seriously as our #1 priority at the moment, and which is why we've additionally put in a 10% enhancement of staff into the communications and the dispatches. So those people who answer the 101 calls and the 999 calls, and those people who dispatch officers to incidents as well. So what we were aiming for is to get up to our full new establishment, which is the 10% increase in staffing by the end of September. However, what we have seen is higher than normal attrition rates of the staff within the force control room. And that's essentially because we are recruiting in various different police staff roles across North Yorkshire Police. We are recruiting police officers, we are recruiting PCSOs. And what we find is people who already work in the control room do apply for those jobs because sometimes it's a natural stepping stone, especially to becoming a police officer and a PCSO. So what it's looking like at the moment is that we will achieve our establishment number, our increased establishment by January next year. However, again, what we want to do is try and bring that forward, because we know that there's an element of the several weeks of training for these people as well. So we want to try and bring in the course so it's into 2022, so that we can try and reduce the time that we're at the below establishment number. But what I would say is we have done some really robust recruitment over the last few months. We are starting to see those bums on seats now within the control room and within the training rooms within the FCR at York. So, and that's absolutely having an impact on the improved performance in there as well. One of the other issues that we did have over the last few months, because it wasn't just down to the lack of staff as well, it was also we had to stabilise some of the systems that we use within the force control room, and that meant that we needed to retrain all the existing staff on how to operate the new systems and the subtle differences that were there, which meant that we had to have a pause on the recruitment of staff in there at that point. But as I've said, we've started to push forward some of that recruitment now. What we've also done is look to put additional police staff within the control room. So that's police staff who work in all the other areas of North Yorkshire Police, to actually do some of the work that call handlers do, such as outbound calls, answering emails from members of the public from other forces, so that the call handlers could focus on answering the 999 calls and 101s. And what we actually saw, which is really encouraging, is 180 people across the organisation volunteer to take some of that demand away from the control room, which just shows that we did have that one team approach to trying to solve the problem in there. Another thing we've done recently in July this year, we've identified 20 police officers who work for us who have previous experience in the control room as well. And we have posted them temporarily into the control room to take calls, 999s and 101s, but also to assist in the dispatch function. And that's definitely had a positive impact as well. And that's something that we've never done before to that level. Previously, a few years ago, we did bring in 2 or 3 police officers, but to bring in 20 just shows the determination that we've got to try and increase those call handling figures as well. One of the other things is around performance as well, because what we've done is introduce some data comparisons within the force control room to make sure that we can improve individual performance, but also team performance. But also in relation to the senior management and the middle management within the force control room, is certainly have more scrutiny in terms of increasing the performance of the teams within there to ensure that we give the best possible service that we can. So hopefully that gives some reassurance of the various different methods that we are trying and will continue to bring down those call handling times. But just one of the other methods that we've tried and actions is some external communications. You may have seen that we've gone out to the regional press in terms of trying to educate the public in when it's appropriate to ring 999 and when it's not. And one of the stats that's come out of that is 10% of 999 calls are actually pocket dials where people accidentally phone 999. Every one of those we need to spend time ringing back because we don't know whether or not it's a pocket dial. So these are some of the issues that we have within the force control room, which are out of our control, but we need to keep trying to educate the public to make sure that we're answering the calls that we need to answer. So at that point, are there any questions or any further comment in relation to 999s or 101s?
Yep, I think I'd like to bring in Mabs, then Caroline. I've got a question too, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. It's just on the back of what Mike has outlined there with regards to the nines. Clearly, the issue around the staffing is a concern to us. We need to get a position in place where we have enough staff to deal with demand that's coming in. We're slightly hampered by obviously the issue around multiple recruitment campaigns taking place and officers wanting and staff wanting to progress within the organisation. We have had a look at the option of what other forces are doing, which is putting an almost a temporary ban on anybody moving out of the control room into internal roles. We are having a look at that. That can have a counterproductive effect, because I do know from other forces, if you put a ban from internal moves, what individuals do is get really, really frustrated and look externally. So you lose them from the organisation, which is something which has occurred in neighbouring forces. The issue that Mike has mentioned there around, pocket dials around the 999s, that is a huge issue for us, as is the inappropriate use of nines. You'll have seen from the 24-hour Twitter campaign we did, which was relaying every 999 call as to some of the difference in calls that we do get. For example, this weekend, we had significant blockages from a Tesla calling the 999s multiple times from the automatic calling from the car. And it was just multiple callings, which we then had to put blocks in place with BT in order for that car to be immobilised from being prevented calling 999. So these are some of the issues which can affect on a daily basis our ability to answer those calls, which are of significant concern and risk to North Yorkshire Police.
Thanks, Mabs. Caroline.
Thanks, Zoe. I was just following on from resourcing. It was just to check when you talked about the 20 additional officers. So this is short term. It's not 20 officers at one time as well. This covers, various shift patterns, obviously to strengthen resource within the control room. And you've got your training set from September.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So just for clarity, it is a temporary move that we're making. Those 20 officers are spread across the 4 different bands that we have within the control room. They're taken from various different roles across North Yorkshire Police. We did risk assess whether or not we could take certain people from certain roles, and some people have stayed within the roles because they needed to stay there for the level of risk that they were dealing with. So it was certainly a detailed piece of work involving all the heads of function and commanders across the force to make sure that they were happy for those people to be released. And it certainly had a positive impact within the force control room, but absolutely a temporary measure. We hope by the end of the year that we're up to our full-time equivalent staff within there, which is including the extra 10% that we've increased. And I do fully expect by then that we have some really consistent, good call handling times.
Yeah, thanks. Can I just ask another one as well? It was just about attending Force Control Room Gold. I think one of the areas that was really interesting about the work and support that goes around the plans for those high intensity users and those that are maybe coming through with partners as well, and about any opportunity you've found, having reviewed, I suppose, the demand coming in and the support that you've got looking at the administration, if you found any opportunity to sort of draw on alternative means for partners to make contact through to North Yorkshire Police instead of sort of holding up on the 101 number.
Yeah, I don't have any specific examples of opportunities that we have found, Caroline, but certainly I obviously take over as a temporary ACC for local policing next week. The force control room call handling is certainly one of my areas and the area that I will be prioritising, and speaking to the staff within there is one of the key things that you do need to do, because those are the people who hold the answers to some of the blockages that we have. And I know there will be multiple opportunities. There has been opportunities in there for years for ensuring that partners contact us in the correct way, and we try and reduce some of that demand both for them and for us. And I will be seeking to look for all those opportunities with the senior management team within the control room to try and reduce that demand, because it's key that we do. And when you speak to the staff, they tell you that there is demand that we can reduce in there because they want to focus on the people that need us most.
Yeah, and also key, obviously, that you have that contact with partners to be able to support members of the public. Yep, thank
Absolutely.
you. Thanks.
Thank you. So it's just to say that I do know that there's an awful lot of work that goes on behind the scenes and is going on and has been going on since March. of this year, a real focus on why we're getting the call volume through, our residents ringing for the right reasons. And I thought that the Twitter-thon was really interesting. It really highlighted why residents are ringing in and the calls that we're experiencing. There have been additional money from my office for overtime. I know that you're all working really hard, but the recruiting is ongoing. So it's my understanding there's some new recruits in September and then January, and it will carry on going. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yes, that will have to continue. We do, as I've mentioned already, we do see attrition rates within the force control room to feed those other roles, especially police officer roles and PCSO roles. So it's critical that we keep the recruitment going, we keep the training going, so that we maintain those numbers and we don't drop below, because, you know, bums on seats in the control room is the key thing. We need those people with the care and compassion to answer the call and help members of the public. So recruiting those people continually is the answer to that.
I also think it's really important that we understand the data, harvest the data as to why residents are calling us, and making sure that our partners are actually part of that. If residents are calling us for other reasons, especially on 101, that we have that information, that we can have those discussions with partners too, which is really important. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, so I will move on to the policing response times. The main thing I will point out here to the far, obviously right, June and July in terms of the P grade. So that's the priority grade, which is traditionally those that we look to get to in under an hour. You can see a spike in terms of the response times for those two. Now I need to look at that in further detail, which I will absolutely do. But what I know we did around that time was change the incident gradings with the implementation of a new team within the control room. We were looking to deal with more demand over the phone. We actually changed quite a lot of all of the incident gradings instead, other than immediate and priority grade. And what we found at that point in time is that those people who would normally deal with the priority grade incidents were dealing with different grade incidents. So we identified that in the space of a few days and put measures in place to ensure that we reduced the list of priority grade incidents. So I suspect that the increase for June and July is down to the incident grading changes. Are there any questions or comments on that slide before I move on? Okay.
Sorry, it's actually slightly in relation to the last slide as well. I wanted to ask about online reporting, because we've heard there about obviously phone reporting and the impact of that and the changes that you've made in the control room and priority and so on. And we've talked about partner related demand as well. What obviously we've launched online reporting, and there is the option for people to report non-emergency incidents online as well. What's the impact of that so far in terms of, well, first of all, are you seeing the take up? What is that demand like? Are we seeing it within that 101 slide? Because otherwise that's hidden demand that we're not seeing in these slides, and I think it would be good for it to be represented somehow here, if possible. So it'd be interesting to know whether that is represented in the 101 slide there or not. But also obviously there's potentially a level of reporting there that's impacting on capacity within the control room or capacity elsewhere to manage that. Was that being dealt with by the volunteers, for example, that you brought in as well? So I just wanted to ask about that online reporting element and how that's working, because obviously there's a benefit to that if people are reporting incidents that are actually for other agencies. It's much easier to forward an online form to another email inbox, isn't it, to some extent? But so I just wanted to understand the impact of that, please.
Thanks for the questions there, Tom. So I don't have the exact number of online reports that are coming in via the portal that we use. What I will say, and it relates to one of your last points there, is who are the people who are dealing with that demand, and how much demand is there, and does that stop them answering calls for service? And when I went back into the control room in July this year and spent a couple of weeks there speaking to the staff, speaking to the senior managers, the online reporting was one of the things that was brought up, and I asked the question, do you think it's had an impact on reducing the number of people ringing 101? No, it has the opposite. So people wouldn't normally ring 101, but will do an online report. And looking nationally, that's what a lot of police forces have found. It's actually extra demand. So I need to understand that in more detail in terms of, well, how many hours is it taking us a day to deal with X amount of reports? And if we look to increase those number of reports, does that mean that we need more staff? Is it easy to transfer an online report to an external partner? Those are all the really interesting questions, Tom, that I need to try and find the answers to. But certainly from the senior managers within the control room at the moment, it's extra demand, which is taking people away from actually answering the 101s and 999s. But the reason why we were bringing people in was to look at helping out at eating some of that demand. So the 180 people that volunteered was, can you deal with some of the online reports? So that's one of the key elements, is take some of the, and the really, really important online reports, but take some of those administrative functions that stops you clicking the button and answering a 999 call, or clicking the button and answering a 101 call. So it's something that I've certainly got an interest in to see, because when I was in the control room last time, we didn't have it. I knew it was coming over the hill. Now it's there. I certainly want to understand the impact of it.
Well, that's really interesting to hear. Thank you. I think it would be great then if we could see the volume of online reports that are coming in on the 101 slide, just so that we've got that as an additional kind of point of comparison, because obviously the next thing is social media reporting, isn't it? And I know that's maybe a little way off yet, but it would be important to have that as part of the assessment here. So thank you.
Absolutely. And just a point on that, the more technology you bring in to report, you still need those human beings there to actually assess the risk and ensure that they're getting the right response from it, because some of them might be an immediate phone call back to them, because the element of risk on that online report, on that social media report, is so high that we need to get hold of them as quickly as possible and safeguard them. So yeah, it's all very interesting.
I completely agree. I think the importance for our communities is that additional route, and unfortunately we hear in the office, we hear a lot that people aren't reporting because they don't think it's worthwhile. They can't be bothered because they don't believe they'll ever get through on the phone, or if they do, nobody will respond. And that ability to know that you might not get a response because you're not ringing someone, but you've put the information into the machine, and that it's recorded there, and that it's recognized as a fact, as a piece of data, is really important. Because otherwise we have a situation where the community are telling us one thing and the police data is telling us something very different, and that's a really tricky circle to square out. And so the more reporting we can get, I appreciate that it has that impact, but the more reporting we get, the better, quite frankly, isn't it? And we just have to recognize that, and therefore we have to put the measures in place to deal with it. So it would be good to get that data through so that we can see the benefits and the impact that it's having.
Okay, thanks, Tom. That's noted. Okay, so you'll see, I'll move on. You'll see up on the screen the crime levels that I've had up on there. Nothing significant of change on those crime levels, but moving on, you'll see the burglary and robbery statistics there, still with the outcome rate at 2.51 for burglary and for 2.18 for robbery, and the percentages of awaiting outcome. So those crimes that are in the system waiting to be the admin to be carried out so that we can get the outcome is still at 22.78 and nearly 50% for robbery. I don't know whether Dep, if you DCC is saying if you want to come in at that point and give any comment on relation to the performance.
Yeah, just very quickly, we touched upon it at the last PAM meeting in terms of what the focus has been through the force performance meeting. It did feature neighbourhood crime as an actual thematic through the force performance meeting. A number of actions have been raised with regards to it. It's mainly going back to basics and getting the standards of investigation right, initial attendance right. So, for example, for burglary, we weren't attending all initial calls that had come in, and we are doing now. It's making sure we get forensic services to attend. It's a very intrusive and invasive type of crime type, and we should be doing. You'll have seen the HMIC press releases that were done by Andy Cook as a result of the HMIC thematic as well. The things that we had put into place were prior to the HMIC publishing their report, but what we have done is cross-referenced our approach against that to look at if there is any gaps from that analysis and put the measures in place.
Thank you. Okay, and then the statistics again for violent and vehicle crime there. No major changes since last month. Again here then on the outcomes, as we can see on the right hand table, the awaiting outcomes was at about 31,000. It's actually now at 30,642. So it's come down by about 1,000 because that's an ever changing number. We've had a look into the number of crimes and the type of crimes there. So, for example, out of those 30,000, there's around 10,000 crimes which are crimes are categorised as other incident, are the ones that we normally send to action fraud, so fraud related. So we don't really fully know whether it's a crime or not yet. And certainly then looking at the rest of them, there's still around 10,000 crimes awaiting for finalisation. And I know there's an immense amount of work ongoing and extra staff being put at that side of things so we can get the outcome rate reduced and we can start to see some of those numbers coming down significantly, but that will take some time because, for example, just to get the finalisation of some of the serious crimes such as rape will take, at least 2 hours to go through that one particular crime. And when we've got 10,000 crimes waiting there is a lot of work that's required to eat into that number. Moving on then.
Sorry, can I just ask on that? I mean, Fee's just talked to us a lot about emphasis on evidence-based prosecution. So that would be when you don't necessarily have a victim supporting the action, I guess. And I wonder what your comment would be in that, in terms of your outcome rates there, where the victim is declining to support. Are there other crimes where that evidence-based prosecution should be being emphasised and being taken forwards in order to improve the positive outcome rate?
Are you talking specifically for something for North Yorkshire to look at, Tom, or nationally? Because I think it's probably more of a national, probably more of a national issue, isn't it?
Potentially, but I guess that doesn't stop North Yorkshire Police doing something about it themselves. If there is a case to be made for emphasising evidence-based prosecution, are we doing enough across the board as we are aiming to do in stalking around evidence-based prosecution? It's an open question.
Sorry, may I just come in on that?
Yeah.
It's a really valid question because we do very similar for example, domestic abuse, where the victim declines to prosecute, but we may have body-worn video, we may have the initial 999 call, we may have witness evidence, and what we should always be doing is looking to look at an evidential prosecution rather than a witness prosecution or a victim prosecution if a victim declines to prosecute, in particular where it's cases of vulnerability. So we do have a look at that.
Okay. Yeah. And you're confident that's across the board, not just in those kind of particular safeguarding crimes?
It is, but sometimes you need some victim-based crimes, but you do need the victim to be on board in order to progress. So it's impossible to do without that victim statement.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Michael, just to say that I have picked up on the last couple of PAMs really that there seems to be an ever-growing amount of awaiting outcomes. And I really would like to, not in this particular PAM, obviously, but to drill down into this because it doesn't seem to be getting better. And I know there's an awful lot of work going on behind scenes, but for my own scrutiny and confidence, I would like to take this further, please, offline when we come out of this meeting. Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely, not a problem.
Thank you.
Moving on then to mental health detentions. You can see there that July was higher than average incident levels that we've previously seen. There was one detainee required to be taken out of the county this month, and that was a resident from the north of the county who was detained under Section 136 and taken to West Park, Darlington. That was the closest suite, which is normal practice. You can see there that 30% of detentions resulted in an admission. So no major changes in terms of the Section 136 data for July. Again, on the stop and search, this data hasn't really changed in the last month. What I would say is, speaking to our force lead for stop and search, we're obviously waiting. We can see there because the comment at the bottom. Overall, whilst there appears to be disproportionate stop search numbers based on ethnicity, it's mainly reflected to non-residents, and which is meaning that it's intelligence-led, focused on those who come into North Yorkshire to cause harm. We also need to understand and have the up-to-date census data, which should change those percentages as well. But what we'd also like to look at is, you'll see on there that is the non-stated data. What we'd like to do is look to use the officer-defined data to see if we can actually get a better picture in terms of the ethnicity. As there's still a large number of people that we're stop and searching there that we do not know the ethnicity of. But this slide,
just for the record,
yeah.
I'd just like to make the point that you can't necessarily state that. I think it's really difficult when we look at this in the review groups and the stop and search panel. Yes, you can see some evidence that non-residents are more intelligence led, but there are. I think it's difficult to state that all non-residents are intelligence led, because that's not necessarily the case, and we do see some cases, especially in some of our more rural areas that border more populous areas, that people are coming across the border, and sometimes it's really difficult because you don't see on paper why somebody's been stopped in the first place.
Yeah.
And you have to question sometimes whether people have been stopped simply because they don't fit in the local area, because you can't see any other rationale as to why they've been stopped, and there doesn't seem to be intelligence. So it's very, very rare, but I think you can't. Yeah, it's hard to summarize that with just.
So I mean, we obviously scrutinise our own work in terms of the stop searches, and supervisors review the body worn video. We obviously have, from a stop search panel point of view, to make sure that we are looking at how we use the powers appropriately. So those measures are in place, Tom, to ensure that we are doing things the right way, and the way that the public would expect us to. Yeah.
And I want to say, the majority of the time, the panel and the review groups would agree, but there are those odd occasions when we have to admit that those percentages aren't always in line. But yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Tom. The next slide just shows you the number of police officers, police staff. So it looks at specials, volunteers, special constables and volunteers, and PCSO numbers there, and the workforce diversity mix. And then the projection there in terms of police officers based on the uplift. And I certainly know we are continually recruiting and training police officers. The next cohort starts in the end of September. We've got several cohorts of student officers currently at headquarters being trained on the police constable degree apprenticeship. Next year, we're also going to be introducing the degree holder entry programme, DHEP. So there's a different entry route for police officers, and we're looking forward to introducing that, and that starts at the end of March next year. In terms of PCSOs, as you can see there, from a point of view of maintaining or attaining, should I say, our actual budget, we're a little off that at the moment, and there's a lot of work ongoing with people services and ourselves, certainly within training and across the board with commanders as well, to ensure that we look to increase those numbers through the recruitment campaigns that we have planned for the rest of the year. But there's certainly more work to do there, and what we tend to find and what we have found is that PCSOs are then joining as student officers, and we're seeing a higher attrition rate there, but we do need to attract PCSOs to come and work within the communities across North Yorkshire. Any question or comment on that slide? And as we can see here, from a sickness point of view, coronavirus is still at the top of the list for the number of days lost in terms of those absence reasons, which we expect to see. Certainly, coronavirus probably still being at the top of the list for the foreseeable future, but no major changes in the level of sickness across the organisation.
Although it has gone up, hasn't it? I mean, if we look from August 2021, I mean, coronavirus has been around for a while now. It's significantly gone up of 231 in August this year. And I just wondered, what can we attribute that to?
In terms of the number of people that have have said it's coronavirus is the reason for them being off?
Yeah, it's just, it has gone up. If we look back, there's 140 in March, wasn't there? And now it went down to 91. Now it's steadily gone up to 131. And I just wondered if it was coronavirus that attributes to that.
Yeah, so one of the significant differences is some of the restrictions that we and all police forces across the country had previously. So if you look back in August 2021, on the reasons why you could come back to work, and it was very much a lot more of around self-isolation, etc., and staying away from the workplace. We're not doing that anymore in terms of coronavirus. We expect people to take those measures, but if they are fit to work but have them, then they are coming back to work much sooner. We hope the risk of that is then passing it on is reduced. We can't definitely attribute the fact that we've relaxed the reasons you can come back to work as one of the reasons why it's increased, but we've certainly seen some of the strains be more prevalent, so the restrictions are not out there within communities, so more people are tending to get it, but it's something that we'll keep tracking and keep monitoring.
Thank you.
And that was the last, sorry, go on.
Sorry, do we know how we compare nationally at the moment in terms of sickness? Because I know at one point we were topping the chart. I know we came down, but it'd be interesting to know how we are compared nationally nowadays. Do we know the most recent?
Yeah, they're not tracking it nationally anymore. We don't have to submit data. It's something that isn't tracked. We've always maintained, I know you've mentioned top of the chart there, but we always maintained, and in the region and nationally, one of the lowest sickness levels for COVID-19 throughout the pandemic, and that was down to some of the stringent measures that we did put in place in the States in working from home, etc. So we've always managed to maintain a good service to the public from that side of things. But no, it's not measured nationally anymore, Tom.
And what in terms of sickness overall, or just in terms of COVID?
In terms of the COVID sickness that we used to get weekly reports, and where we had to put daily figures in to the National Coordination Centre, who would then present them across to the chiefs.
That's fair enough. I was wondering more about sickness overall actually, but no, I can understand why the COVID sickness is stopped. But thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. And that's the last slide then.
Thank you very much. And I know that we're really running over time, so I apologise to everybody that's watching. And there's a couple of questions to be asked after this too. But really quick one on your slides, and that was the increase in the personal robbery. And I know that Tom did a bit of digging earlier on for me, and we had a look at, so it was about 31. The increase. And would you say that was down to an increase in visitor population coming into the county? Would you expect to see that in summertime? Can you account for it at all?
We often do see the seasonal increases over summer with the footfall across the county. I don't know without looking at it from where the offences were committed and who they were committed against, but we often do see spikes over the summer period when we certainly get large numbers into York and to the coast and into the Dales, etc. But I don't have the exact detail on that, Commissioner.
Maps?
Yeah, just on that, Commissioner, in particular the increases in the City Command, which has had in terms of year-to-date crime of personal robbery from last year 33 to 70 this year. Some of that will be because of increase in footfall, with restrictions being lifted, more footfall, more people, more criminality taking place. We've seen an increase across the force area, and it's been picked up through the force performance meeting. We did go into, again, the personal robbery hotspots, what we're doing around problem solving, what we're doing about repeat locations, repeat offenders, repeat victims, etc. And we did have a much more closer scrutiny around this. So it is on our radar to have a look at, and we are looking at it actively.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much, Maps. Okay. Right. So thank you, Michael, for that. We'll go to questions from the public. Agenda item 6. So we have a couple more questions, don't we? So thank you for those that have submitted more questions for us. So this one's from Mr. Biggs in Northallerton. It's about cycling on the pavement. And it says, it is an operational matter for individual chief officers of the police to enforce the law on cycling on pavements. I have to highlight that enforcement is not being carried out. Indeed, I have witnessed police officers seeing the offence being committed, but no action taken. I would like to request that you raise the lack of enforcement with the Chief of Police as a matter of safety as well as enforcing the law. I would question whether all police officers know that cycling on pavements is an offence and that it is punishable by an on-the-spot fixed penalty notice. Could North Yorkshire take the lead to clamp down on this law breaking and encourage the rest of the country to follow suit?
Thanks,
So
Commissioner.
who's coming to? So Michael, you're going to answer that.
Yes, and thanks, Mr. Briggs, for your question. So in terms of North Yorkshire Police and the number of priorities, and especially our focus is, I guess, from a North Allerton point of view, it's something I can take away and speak to the local neighbourhood policing team there. And if it's a particular problem of cycling on pavements in North Allerton, that's something that we can look at dealing with. It is an offence. It's actually not cycling on pavement because the Act is from 1835 and they don't use the word pavements. But it is an offence and it can be punishable by an on-spot fine. I believe it's £30. However, we do use discretion when dealing with people cycling on pavements, which is absolutely what we need to do. What you won't see is various people getting informal warnings for cycling on pavements and asked to either go onto the road or get off the bike. There's many people that unfortunately do use the roads because they don't feel use the pavements because they don't feel it's safe at certain points, and that's something that we often speak to cyclists around as well. But we do sometimes also conduct specific neighbourhood policing operations to look at cycling on pavements and other levels of what the public see as antisocial behaviour, and that's something I'll take away and speak to the North Allerton neighbourhood policing team around.
Thank you. Now, did we have another question? Here we go. So this came in on Twitter and it's from Gwen Swinburne. Hello, Gwen. Can you ask the process in place to check the Chief Constable is meeting her legal obligations regarding complaints submitted to her re misconduct in public office complaints and her obligation to the complaints? I think we're going to answer this from the office of the PFCC, but also Mabs as DEP. So Mabs, can I come to you first?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Gwen, for the actual question. So any complaint that we get, which is in relation to an officer or member of police staff, which is with regards to misconduct in a public office, it's obviously assessed by our professional standards department. It's either dealt with as a misconduct or a gross misconduct investigation. That investigation obviously takes its course and takes place. If there are some, everything is in line with police regulations. They are reviewed by me as the person with oversight and appropriate authority for professional standards itself. There can be delays in investigations, which are again scrutinised and reviewed. That can be because of the availability of the individual who's subject of a complaint, a federation representative or unison representative in either case, or alternatively because of witness availability, forensic, CCTV, like any other investigation. But we obviously take any complaints of misconduct in public office very seriously, and as does the Chief Constable in relation to her responsibilities, which are delegated to me.
Mabs, could you say, sorry, just also to cover off the other angle, if it is somebody reporting misconduct in public office outside of the police, what's the process then?
Yeah, if it's not relating to if it's misconduct in the public office with regards to some other organisation or public authority, then again, the complaint is taken and we would investigate if it does meet the threshold of an investigation and criminal offence taking place.
Thank you. And just to cover this from our angle, obviously the Commissioner is responsible for Chief Constable complaints. So if a matter comes in related to the Chief Constable in this regard, then that is also dealt with through the delegations in place by the Chief Executive and Monitoring Officer.
Right.
Zoe, just in relation, Gwen did also post another question, and just to say on that front that we are responding to her outside of the meeting already, and I have been in touch with her related to this last week. There's actually less of a time constraint in relation to her query on this one, as there isn't the same framework of review in around the annual governance statement as there is around the statement of accounts. So there is a bit of extra time for her to make any comments on the annual governance statement. Thank you.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. Right, so going to agenda item 7, which is any other business. I don't believe there is. Agenda item 8, date of the next meeting, which will be the 22nd of September. So it's just for me to say thank you to everybody that's watching and tuning in, and thank you to all those that are taking part. Great that the questions are coming in. Keep them coming. I really appreciate that. Okay, many thanks, everyone. Have a lovely afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.